Greetings, everybody. I'm Julie Wiskirchen from the Authors at Google team in Los Angeles, and today we're very excited to welcome Seth Grahame-Smith. Seth had visited us once before, about 3 years ago, when things were just starting to take off for him with Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And since then, it's been a whirlwind of activity, and he was the co-creator, executive producer of the MTV series The Hard Times of R.J. Berger. He wrote the New York Times bestseller Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, and he adapted it for the screen. It's coming out this summer. And he also wrote the screenplay for Tim Burton's Dark Shadows, which is coming out in a few weeks. So, besides all that, he's got another new book, which is Unholy Night, which just came out yesterday, and he is here to talk to us about it today. So let's welcome Seth.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, everybody, for taking time out of lunch to come and hang out. I'm excited to be here. I had a great time last time I was at Google, and let me open with some pandering, I guess. What I do in books would be impossible without you guys. And, you know, we were just talking about this a minute ago, but, you know, the type of books that I write are very research intensive. And I know that sounds crazy because on the surface they're absurd, and, you know, Abraham Lincoln did not actually fight vampires as far as I know, and, you know, the three wise men were not, so far as I know, swashbuckling marauders, but I like to weave in as much fact into my fiction as I possibly can. And in order to do that, I need to do quite a bit of research. And, you know, 15 years ago, I would have, God forbid, actually had to go to a brick and mortar library, and not just any library, but a research library specific to the topic I was trying to research. You know, if I was doing Unholy Night, who knows, I might have had to go to, you know, Jerusalem and you know, comb through some old New Testament Apocrypha to find out what I was writing about. Or if I was writing Lincoln, I would have had to go to Springfield and comb through the archives at the Lincoln Museum and Library. Now I can do it all from home. And, you know, there's a danger to that because, you know, you have to not only go online and research things, but you have to be careful about, you know, which sites you trust and which you don't. You have to get multiple sources. You actually have to do some legwork. But thanks to you guys, you know, and what goes on at Google, and it just, I don't know, it's completely changed my world personally as an author. So it's interesting to be here and talk to you guys. I typically like to do a Q&A more than a lecture because I don't really, you know, like the sound of myself lecturing at you, and you know, you guys have better things to do than sit here and listen. But I will tell you a little bit about how this particular book came to be. Now, last time I was here at Google, I had just written Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and it was the sort of the beginning of, you know, the book getting some notoriety. As a result of that, I came to see you guys. I went, you know, on a book tour all over the country, and no matter where I went, every bookstore, this is back 3 years ago when there was such a thing as bookstores. I don't know if you guys remember. We used to actually physically go and buy books at brick and mortar stores. No matter what store I would go into anywhere in the country, this is 2009, so it was the bicentennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, and it was also the absolute pinnacle, the height of the Twilight phenomenon in literature. This is like just as the movies were starting to come out. So no matter where I was, I would see two tables in the front of every bookstore. There'd be the Twilight True Blood table right here, and then there'd be the Abraham Lincoln biography table. And so I had made this like cynical observation. Boy, if you could combine those two things, you know, that would be a license to print money right there. Is what that would be, you know. And so this cynical observation led me, as it always does, into a real research mode. So, you know, I got on my browser, Chrome, pandering, and lo and behold, I fell in love with the actual life story of Abraham Lincoln, which I didn't at that point know that much about. I knew $5 bill, honest axe, top hat, okay? Just the things that we always, like, that are in our DNA from the time we're elementary school kids. If you grow up in the United States, you know, that's the four things you know about Lincoln. What I didn't know is that his story was a superhero origin story. And I'm not talking about the one that I wrote. I'm talking about the real one. He is a guy with absolutely no education, no money, no family connections. He's awkward and gangly. He looks funny. He can't read. And his mom mysteriously dies when he's 9 years old. And then that sets off a chain of events where tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. There's not a 2-year period in Lincoln's life after he's 9 years old that he doesn't, some great tragedy befalls him and he has to pull himself up by his bootstraps, get over his suicidal tendencies, his melancholy, his famous depression, and just go on. And so I became fascinated with it and fascinated with how that guy became arguably the greatest American, possibly, and certainly, if not the greatest, one of the greatest American presidents. Where did he get that strength? Where did he, put the country on his shoulders and pull it back together, et cetera? So once I realized that this was a superhero origin story, it's like, all right, well, now I know a way to make it work with the vampires where it's not just going to be, a weird sort of conversion of all these facts and fiction. So Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, lo and behold, it was going to be scrutinized because it was the first thing I was doing after Pride and Prejudice, and lo and behold, it worked. And book came out, did very well. All of a sudden, I got a call from Tim Burton. Hey, do you want to make a movie? And I said, great. I think I can fit that into my schedule. And so I wrote the screenplay for that, and then Tim was the producer on that. And then after I wrote the screenplay for Lincoln, he said, hey, I'd really like the screenplay. Do you want to write Dark Shadows? I said, I think I can fit that in. And in the meantime, so before my head had stopped spinning, literally like the last time I was in the old Google building here in LA and doing one of these, like my head had just started to spin. And before it stopped, I found myself in London at Pinewood Studios, on the set of Dark Shadows, and here we were writing. And during that time, I was also starting to write Unholy Night. And Unholy Night had a very different sort of, for lack of a better word, genesis, no pun intended, but it wasn't one of those things where it started as an observation. The idea for Unholy Night came to me out of the blue. Stephen King, I don't know if anybody here has ever read his book on writing, but he talks about how in his mind there are these men in the basement that are sitting around a table talking about ideas and coming up with things. And then when that idea is ready, whether you're ready for it or not, it goes in the vacuum tube and goes upstairs to your brain and just hits you. That never happens to me. My men in the basement are probably all dead or lazy or something, but I really have to whip them into shape to no, let's work on this idea. Let's develop this idea. This was one of those things where I was here in LA. It was the middle of July or maybe June. It was summer. It was hot. And I was driving up Robertson to what is now an empty store, but used to be a Blockbuster, to return a digital versatile disc. You remember those DVDs, right? And you also remember Blockbuster. This before we, So again, back in the old days, 2 years ago. And I was pulling into the parking lot on this, and this question just popped into my mind, fully formed, like, what were the three wise men doing there, really? And that was it. That was the question. And it wasn't as if I was driving around New England and looking at all the nativity scenes on the front lawns and seeing the three wise men, lit up in plastic form and say, who the hell are those guys really? This just came out of nowhere. And it was an intriguing question. And once again, it led me into my research mode, which was, back on my then updated latest beta of Chrome and, which was phenomenal and not buggy at all and was great. And reading essentially passages from the New Testament. Reading about, okay, well, how much do we know about the three wise men from the New Testament? Turns out virtually nothing. And that really excited me, that intrigued me. It's like the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew. That's the only time you ever hear them mentioned. All we know are basically the same four things we know about Lincoln. But in this case, the four things are, come from the east, there's three of them, they stop at Herod's, they go from Herod's to a manger in Bethlehem with gold, frankincense, and myrrh, pay their respects, on their way, never to be heard from again. Now that to me is, there's a lot of room there to mess with that, and so I got really excited by where'd they get the gold and frankincense and myrrh? Could they have, say, stolen it? why were they going to that manger that night? Was it pay their respects, or was it perhaps to find a place to hide because they had just stolen golden frankincense? So it starts the ball rolling in your mind of like, who are these guys? And the process got rolling, and I was whipping my men in the basement into shape, and they were getting on board with it, and we were all developing the idea. And then I stopped because I got really scared, because I had just been through the experience of coming face to face with lifelong Jane Austen fans who were like, how dare you, and coming face to face with some Lincoln scholars that were like, I don't even understand this. What are you doing? Now, in all fairness, most of the people that are the biggest fans of PPZ are Jane Austen fans, like lifelong fans. And the vast majority of Jane Austen fans are totally on board with my bastardization of it. Also, to be fair, the Lincoln community, and there is such a thing, there's a community of historians and scholars and lovers of Lincoln, are almost universally behind Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter because they appreciate it for what it is, and it's not cheapening the legacy of the real guy, it's just bringing new people into the tent. So I've been really lucky twice, but I didn't think that I would be so lucky the third time, because it's a little different when you're dealing with the birth of Jesus, than dealing with, a Regency era romance novel. As beloved as it is, it's just a little different. So, I really had to sit and think about, okay, what am I trying to say here? And I made some very concrete decisions early on before I wrote Unholy Night. Number one, Jesus was never going to be more than a 2-week-old infant. I was not going to get into the business of putting words into the mouth of Jesus. So that was number one. And in fact, Jesus, the word never even appears in the book. It's always the infant or the child, even though it's all, everybody knows who it is. Number two, Joseph and Mary always had to be the paragons of virtue. I wasn't about to have I wasn't going to do to Mary, the mother of Jesus, what I did to, Lizzie in PPZ, where she's like a bloodthirsty sword woman and, all this stuff. Like that was not her turf. They were just Joseph and Mary, as you know and love them in the Bible, faithful, devout, committed believers. And then number three, I wanted the book to say something about faith. I didn't want it to just be like this romp where I'm using Christianity as my canvas. I wanted to actually have a message. Now, my own personal religious history is a little checkered. I was born Seth Greenberg, not exactly a Christian name. Then, when I was 3, my parents split up, and my sort of wonderfully crazy mother, who was an English major, loved the English author Kenneth Grahame, Wind of the Willows, things like that, and legally changed my name when I was 3 to Graham. So stay with me. And then, when I'm 5, she marries an Episcopalian, Smith, and then rather than saddling me with the unfortunately alliterative Seth Smith, she's like, maybe we should hyphenate. So that's how I became Seth Grahame-Smith when I was 5. And, that's also how I started, learning about Christianity, because I was this little 5-year-old Jewish kid with all these Jewish relatives and all this Jewish lineage, who all of a sudden was an Episcopal altar boy. Seriously, literally, altar boy. So, I've always seen myself as kind of, straddling these two worlds. And this was a very interesting exercise for me, because while it is about, essentially the birth of Christianity, almost everyone in Unholy Night is either an Arab or a Jew, because it turns out there weren't any Christians back then. So, it was interesting from that point to sort of delve back into really religious texts, reading the New Testament, going back and reading the Old Testament for background and for, mythology, and then reading the Apocrypha that's written, in the centuries after the New Testament. There's actually a great tradition that sprung up in Europe, especially about the 3 wise men, and in Asia. Everyone wants to claim them as their own, even though they don't really appear in the Bible that much or at all after they leave. There's great traditions and festivals dedicated to them in Europe, and in the book, that's where the names of the 3 wise men come from. Gaspar, Melchior, and Balthazar are the traditional 3 names of the wise men. And I don't know where they came from, but somebody decided that was the case, and so that's what I stuck to. So anyway, the point being, I really wanted to say something about faith. I didn't want to pander and be like, I'm afraid of Christian backlash, so therefore I'm going to like overdo it. But I also didn't want to offend anyone's sensibilities. So that's a real tightrope. I wanted devout Christians to be able to read this and go, wow, what a great fun ride, and it made me think weirdly differently about my faith. And I wanted, staunch agnostic or atheist to be able to read this and go, wow, what a fun ride. So that's a tough one, and we'll see if it happens that way or not. But but it was a fun one to write, and it was a real challenging one to write because unlike Lincoln, I didn't have the crutch of every day of Lincoln's life at this point has been chronicled. I can go on. There's a site called the Lincoln Log where you can literally enter a date at any point of Lincoln's existence, and there is a check that he signed from that day for groceries, or there's Lincoln wrote a letter to Mary about this on this day, and everything. And so if I get lost in the narrative, I'm like, well, what was Lincoln really doing? Okay, I'll write about that. Now you have scripture and a tradition of the nativity, and that the baby Jesus had to get out of Judea and into Egypt before Herod got his hands on him. But you don't know how he got there, and you don't know what happened after he got there. And so that was where I had to invent within the lines of various pieces of scripture. So anyway, that's how the book came to be, and it came out yesterday, and I just don't know. I'm in that zone right now where I got an email from my publisher this morning, and she said, unlike a movie or anything like that, the release date of a book is the day where the author gets all dressed up in the tuxedo and gets ready and does his hair all perfect, and then nothing happens, because books are different. It's not a movie where I'm not like checking my watch to see where the grosses come in tonight and we'll know how we're doing. It takes time. You don't know, and reviews make the difference, and books are much more of a slowly cuming word of mouth thing. So anyway, that's why I'm here, hawking my goods to you fine people. But with that, I was hoping to kind of like turn it over to some questions and to see, what sorts of things interest you guys. I mean, I'm certainly interested in what you guys do. We were just talking before about, I was asking, so what specifically happens in this office versus other Google offices? Well, it sounds like everything happens here. It sounds like Chrome happens here and YouTube happens here. It sounds like those awesome new Google glasses that I'm sure you guys are going to let me try out before I leave happen here. And otherwise I'm going to make one of those parodies. You guys watch out that are, But no, it's really exciting. But what's exciting to me is, again, I'm going back into pandering mode, but it's pandering with truth. What's exciting to me is like everything you guys do in this building, I use as a tool for what I do. The book trailers for my books launch on YouTube. The one for Lincoln has about 1.5 million hits now. It's crazy. And that book trailer that we just uploaded to YouTube completely set the tone for the whole campaign for the book. I have to do a Hangout. I have to. I have my Google Plus all set up, but I have to do a Hangout. So I apologize for not having done one yet. But I use your browser. I use your video. I use, in the future, I'm sure I'll use your glasses too. So it's really cool. So if you guys have questions for me, that would, be exciting, because I do better in a conversation format than I do in a lecture format. Yes?
The obvious question. When are you going to start work on Sergey Brin, the Batman?
Oh, man. Listen. Sergey Brin, the Batman. I mean, you think about it, first of all, there's one of the few guys in the world who actually can afford to do that, already has his own awesome plane, from what I hear. Has bat glasses, with facial recognition, and man, that's a great idea. Listen, I will do it. I'll start tomorrow if I can get paid in stock. So, hopefully Sergey is watching. Yeah, available anytime. You know how to reach me. Yes.
Hi, big fan of PPZ, and looking forward to reading this book. I was just concerned when you were talking about it, about the reaction that you might get from some Christian fundamentalists. They can get pretty scary, and
Sure.
I just kind of wanted to make sure that you're fully aware of what you've done, because
Do you know what you've done?
there's some crazy people out there, and
Yeah.
you know, they can be violent.
And my picture is in the book.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's
and
not
I'm
good.
doing this. I'm being recorded right now. I'm not, and I'll tell you why. Is because I think that for two reasons. Number one, there's always going to be a group of people you're never going to affect. You're just never going to change an opinion. You know, the fact that that the wise men are even characters in my book, that Mary and Joseph are even characters in my book, is going to be offensive to some people. I respect that. I think, however, when people read the book and they understand that the journey that Balthazar goes through in the book, especially because he's our way in, he's the wise man who we care about the most in the book, he goes on a very positive pro-faith journey, and that was a choice. And again, like, I made a conscious choice that I wanted to be exciting and entertaining, and I wanted to be dark and bloody and cool, but not offensive. And what I did was I wanted the book, again, to have a very pro-faith message. Balthazar, when he begins, is as staunch an atheist as you're ever going to find. He doesn't have any time for the old stories. He doesn't have any time for all that superstition, whatever. And he's got a very painful past that we sort of, come to know throughout the course of the book. By the end of the book, he has not only saved the baby Jesus, but he saved himself in order, through his understanding of, his openness to belief, his openness to faith, and his openness to acceptance. And, so I think that when people read the book and they understand that, anyway, I think that they'll realize that it is not in any way a critique or criticism of faith. It's actually a positive message about faith, just done in a very genre kind of crazy way. So believe me, I thought about that a lot during the process, and the last thing I wanted to do was pit myself against any religious group or anything. So
The only other point that I would make about that is that I'm not worried about the people who actually read the book.
Sure.
I'm worried about the people who don't read the book, who know, like, basically the cliff notes with the summary of what it's about, or just the fact that it even goes in that area in any kind of comedic manner. Those are the people to worry about, because they're the ignorant ones. They're the ones who are not going to read it and say, oh, well, this is actually pro-faith and it's not that bad.
yeah,
It's,
I think there's very little I can do about that, to be honest with you. There's very little I can do. I mean,
Except for get a bodyguard.
No. Look, I think that, first of all, it'd be flattering if, like, people cared enough about the book to get that worked up about it, in a way, because, it's hard for books to get noticed these days, and I'm sure there are people that are in my life that would be like, I'd welcome some controversy. We'd sell more books, Of course, I have to deal with the fallout personally, but, like, when Harry Potter came out, there were probably 5% of the people out there that said it's about witchcraft. We got to ban it. We got to burn it. We got to, keep our kids away from it. I'm guessing that's the same 5% of people that are just going to be like, we got to ban this book. We got to burn this book because it deals, with a sacred text. And there's nothing I can do, except repeatedly say the truth of this is pro-faith and read the book. Please read the book. But again, I've been pleasantly surprised twice now by the reaction of people who I was afraid of being really critiqued by and attacked by. They either haven't critiqued and attacked, or they've read the book and have actually come around to, enjoying it. So, yeah.
Coming off of adapting a book to a movie, was it hard to? Were you tempted at all to write this, like, keeping the future movie in mind and setting things up to be stageable, or did you really want it to be a book first, and who knows what'll happen?
No, that's a great question. I mean, it was a challenge, to be honest with you, not to write the movie of the book or the book of the movie or whatever. Coming off of adapting Lincoln, I realized that there were a lot of things I could have made my life easier. That could have made my life easier having written Lincoln the book, like having a central villain for one. Like, my book doesn't have a central villain. Lincoln doesn't have a central villain. It doesn't have a thrilling climax. It doesn't have any of the real things that make a movie work. And so the process for adapting Lincoln was really laborious because a lot of that stuff had to be invented from scratch for the movie. So I'm sure that subconsciously that affected. For instance, Unholy Night has a very clear central villain. It has a thrilling climax. It has all the things that were one to adapt it into a movie would make one's life easier. But other than that, I was conscious also of not writing the book of the movie. I didn't want to I didn't want this book to be the novelization of some future movie. I wanted it to be a book. And so I actually, in some cases, went out of my way to write things that I knew were never going to be in the movie. They were just tangential or internal or But I'm sure that subconsciously I was influenced. It's impossible to say that I wasn't. So how about two more, and then then you guys can go back to work.
I've got one actually.
Yes.
About your research on Unholy Night. I don't remember there being a whole lot about the wise men in the 4 Gospels in the Bible, and I'm just curious, did you look at all of those other Gospels?
Oh yeah.
And was there more in there, or did you just kind of invent most of it?
No, Matthew and Luke is really where it all comes from, and then there's also a lot of later texts, the Apocrypha they're called, that are just sort of, like whether they be like the Gnostic Gospels or things like that, or even like the Quran, has, there are parts of the Quran that deal with Christ's journey as an infant, So it's interesting, you take all these different sources and you sort of put together a patchwork of a truth, of a story. You know their names are Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar, and you know that while Joseph and Mary were traveling with the baby Jesus, that certain miracles occurred that we don't necessarily hear about in the New Testament, at least not the King James or the New International editions. So there are a lot of things in there that are interesting, but most of what we know about the wise men comes from oral tradition, comes from just stories that are handed down through the ages and legends that have sprung up around them, and not very much in the Bible itself, which in a way was freeing, but also in a way made the job harder because so much has to be invented and yet be respectful and work within the framework of what's there. So how about one last question and we can, yes? Okay.
So for me, as I was growing up, there are books that I distinctly remember. I think it was just as I was reading books and maturing that really stick in my head over time. And I just kind of always think back fondly upon those books and judge other books by those. What kind of are the
Sure. Sure. What are my signpost books? The books that I hold up and well, as a kid, my dad my stepfather was a used and rare book dealer. And we had 5,000 books in our basement that we've converted into a library. And most of what he was interested in was genre. It was horror, science fiction, fantasy. And so I grew up being inundated with Heinlein, with Asimov, with Bradbury. And when I was 12, it was King, and King was king. And King is still king in my, I'm an unabashed, not disciple, that's the wrong word, especially in this context, but King lover, unapologetically to this day. And I just read everything that I get my hands on of King's. One of the ones that really stuck with me early on was Skeleton Crew and It. Those were big in the 80s for me. Another one, though, a real one that got under my skin in a big way that I think about all the time was Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was Ray Bradbury's, the story of the traveling carnival, Mr. Dark coming to town, and it was really it's a book about boys aspiring to be men and men aspiring to be boys, and a story about regret in small towns, and it's just a beautifully written story. So I tend to judge, myself and everything against, King and those guys, that sort of canon of genre authors. Okay, one last in the back. Yes?
Well, when you did your research, did you need to consult to any religious scholars, theologians, or anyone like that?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I didn't consult with I would say like people of deep faith, let's say, during the writing of the book. But after I'd written the manuscript, I had several people of different faiths and of devout faith that had no connection to me directly read the book and sort of give feedback about it. And honestly, the person, this was like another encouraging thing about, my impending assassination, but was that, one of the more, self-proclaimed evangelical, deeply devout Christians really loved the book. And I got a long letter back from her about, about how it had been handled delicately and about how, so that was really encouraging to know. So, well, thank you guys for taking time, and it's great. It's really cool to be here, and I'm a huge fan of what you guys are doing. So thank you, and thanks for coming to hear me. Yeah, thanks.